episode of Ready to Write. It is our final episode for this week. It is at the time of recording Friday. You might, of course, be listening or watching these on a different day, and that's absolutely okay. With that reminder, actually, you are exactly where you need to be. So one of the pieces that you will hear me say a lot is you don't need to play catch up. So it doesn't matter when you're watching these. Yes, we're tying them in with NaNoWriMo next month. But really that's an excuse. It's just an opportunity to tie in with something because it makes it, fun. If you're watching this at some other time, that's absolutely glorious and wonderful too. You are exactly where you need to be. Today's episode is called Writing and Editing Are Not the Same Thing. And you will have heard me, if you've been following along, you will have heard me made reference to this more than once because it's really important. Very often, too often, if as you engage in that writing process, if you then try and go back and polish up your language or use a slightly different turn of phrase or even go back and correct the spelling mistakes, you lose the flow of where you're at. Which reminds me, one quick practical tip for you. Turn off the automatic spell checker. If you're, depending on what you're writing on a Mac at least, it quite often, if you type something, you'll see it underlined in red and you'll know that the computer thinks it's a spelling mistake. Turn that off. Not all the time. I mean, it's really useful. But when you're writing that first draft, and you sit down to do your writing for the day, I would highly recommend you turning it off. If you're using Scrivener, which is a software that I highly recommend, if you're using Scrivener, it's really easy to do. You go into the menu, edit, it's under spelling and grammar, and then there's a box that you can check or uncheck. Well, it's not a box, it's an option that you can check or uncheck to turn it off. Why is this important? Because otherwise, as you're going along, because it's red, it will grab your attention and it will want you to pay attention to it. And you might be, stronger willed than some of us, and you'll find it easy just to ignore that. However, there's no point wasting willpower on something like spelling checking. Why would you want to do that? So instead, I would encourage you, turn it off. You can put it back on at the end of the session, but just while you're in that, going with the flow writing mode. That's just a quick practical top tip for you. Other writing softwares will have another way of doing it. If you're not sure, just Google it. That's the easiest way to find out how to do it. But I would highly recommend it because I know for myself when I've been in the throes of writing and then it just grabs your attention and takes you out of it. Now, of course, this is not us advocating for spelling mistakes in your writing. You will go back and check the spelling. Hear me. This is purely for when you're getting that first draft done. So that's just a quick practical top tip for you. But what I really want to encourage you today is to engage with Holy Spirit while you are writing. And when you get to the end of a writing session and you go back and you look at what you've written, you might want to read through it and review it. Again, you don't need to worry about the spelling mistakes at that stage if you don't want to. This is not about correcting it. This is not about getting everything neat and polished. The benefit of reading through it before you go into before you put it to one side and leave it to the next day, it allows you just to see where you're at and also, more importantly, to get that guidance from God as you go along because you don't have to do this on your own. Remember what Jesus said in John 14 or 16 or both probably. Holy Spirit is your counselor, your guide, your teacher, your advocate, there to help you as you go through in all of things, but it includes with your writing as well. Which reminds me, this idea of writing and editing not being the same thing is also really important if and when you journal with Holy Spirit. If you don't journal with Holy Spirit, I'd really encourage you to give it a try because it's just such a wonderful thing to do. With that reminder as well, if you've never done that before, get the Youier book. Go to youier.com. You can join the Youier movement, get a copy for free, or you can get a copy on Amazon because that does give you, at the end, in the second half, it gives you lots of questions that you can then practice journaling with Holy Spirit. And for those of you, because this was me before, I kept a bit of a diary when I was a kid, but not, some people, they'll tell you, particularly writers, lots of writers will tell you that they kept journals and diaries every single day throughout all of their life. Some of us didn't. I didn't. And actually for me, the idea of journaling, before I started journaling with Holy Spirit, I was like, I used to do morning pages for a bit, as I know some of you know that I did. But I would sometimes just get lost in navel gazing and then send me down a rabbit hole. It really wasn't for me until I actually started journaling intentionally with Holy Spirit that it became this really powerful thing, giving him an opportunity to speak. What does this have to do with writing and editing? Slightly different, because obviously I'm not suggesting that you edit God. That would be weird. But what I am suggesting you do is that you ask a question. Okay, God, what's on your heart right now? And then pause and you write down everything that comes to mind without editing. Simply write it all down. And then afterwards you can go back and you can read through it and you say, oh God, I heard you saying this and I heard you saying that. What's going on there? Or what did you mean there? Seeking clarification. That's as it applies specifically to journaling with Holy Spirit. But equally, you can apply this to your writing as well. So I don't know what, imagine you're writing non-fiction for a moment, because we can talk in terms of topics. So I don't know what your book is about, or your series of books. Remember, we said you don't need to think of this as the one book to rule them all. Whatever the book is that you are writing about and what your topic is about, we're going to pretend, I'm looking around at something now. Okay, we're pretending you're writing a book about orchids. I can see my pink orchid up on the shelf there. I'm not going to write a book about orchids. I'm very good at not looking after them brilliantly, although this one is in flower, which is something of a miracle. But imagine that you're writing a book on orchid care and the best way to look after orchids if you live in the UK. I'm saying that because I remember from a conversation I've had previously inside the Blue House that different areas of the country, one of my friends lives in Florida, and she growing vegetables in Florida, things come into season and it's different to what it would be here in the UK, for example. I mean, across America you probably have loads of different seasons because of the way, it's a very big place. Anyway, so imagine that you were writing a book on the best care of orchids in the UK, and you decided, right, today I'm going to write a chapter on soil. Or not soil, what's the stuff that they put inside the pot? It's like barky stuff. I don't know. But remember, we're making this up as we go along. So imagine that today you're going to write your chapter on bark and stuff to go in pots. And so you turned off your spell checker. You've got some notes or you've got an idea of where you're going, and then you just write. Go. 15, 20 minutes, whatever that time limit is, or whatever time you have set aside. Because remember, we explored this earlier in the week, getting intentional. In fact, it might even just been yesterday, but getting intentional about being consistent, even if it's just 15, 20 minutes every single day. So you've got your 15 minutes, you're going to write it, and then when you're done, whether you've got the end of that section or whether you've left it, the timer's gone off after 15 minutes and you've left it open-ended. Remember, open loops, so it's easy to get back in the next session. You can then go and look at what you've written and, okay, Holy Spirit, wow, what do you have to say about this? Have you got any thoughts on what's going on here? Could I express that better? Now, you might be thinking, well, why is God, what interest might God have in orchids? Or what interest might God have in me writing a book about orchids? And you might go, well, he's the creator of the universe, and surely he's got much bigger and better things to be interested in than me and my book about orchids. And I would tell you, nonsense. He is interested in everything. Yes, he is the creator of the universe. He created orchids in the first place. So as an aside, it would stand to reason that if you were writing a book about the best care of orchids in the UK, he created the UK. And he created orchids. So I think he'd have something to say about it and would definitely be able to help you. But as it pertains to, is he interested in helping you? Absolutely. And the reason I know this is some of you have heard my story about how I was loved into heaven in my early 20s because of a Bible weight loss course. And the premise of that course was, well, anytime you're tempted to eat, I don't know, a great big chocolate bar when you're not hungry, talk to God about it. This idea that God was interested in all aspects of my life, including what I put inside my mouth, was a revelation to me, was news to me. I was like, I knew that God loved me. And I'd prayed the prayer when I was 12. Some of you know my scared out of hell moment. I'd grown up in church. I knew that God loved me up here in my head. But I hadn't had this real introduction to the heart of Father's love until that moment. And so it was a bigger story for another time probably, or you can read it on the Youier About page. For me, it really was that moment. And it started me on this journey to actually being Youier and how we are here today. My point is this. I know firsthand that he is interested in every aspect of what happens in my life. And he thinks I'm pretty special, but you know what? He thinks you're pretty special too. So he's also very, very interested in everything that happens in your life. And that includes the things that you're excited about. There's a reason why you're writing the book that you are writing. And so I would really encourage you, engage with Holy Spirit as you're going through this process. You don't have to treat it like, this really torturous process. And actually, we're going to get into that next week. A little bit more of the mind gymnastics and how you don't have to angst your way through writing your book. Yes, there'll be some days where you need to put one foot in front of the other, keep on keeping on, like we talked about earlier in the week. But actually, it doesn't need to be this really torturous process. So engage with Holy Spirit in this, remembering that when you're writing, you are writing. You're not editing. You are simply writing. That's not to say that you can't ask Holy Spirit as you're writing. If you get to a bit like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here, help. What do you think about this? Absolutely, of course, engage with him in all of that process. But editing and writing, they are two very distinct tasks. And don't forget as well, when it comes to your final book and you're getting it ready to publish, you don't have to be your own editor. In fact, I would highly encourage you not to be your own editor. It amazes me how many times I've finished a book, any book, finished a book and gone, this is done. And then given it over to editors and they're like, yeah, there's a spelling mistake there. And oh yeah, that bit doesn't make sense. And I'm not really sure what's going on here. You need fresh eyes on your book. So whilst you can write, and then when you finish writing a section, you can edit, or you might choose to write the whole thing and then edit the whole thing. It's entirely up to you. At the end of it all, you do ideally want to have an editor to help you as well. Now, they don't have to be somebody who's officially an editor as their job title. My dad was one of my editors for much of my fiction. But it is helpful to have a fresh pair of eyes, even when you're doing this with God, because of course God will give you amazing insights into what you're doing. And like I said a couple of days ago, Adam had Eve. We are made for community. You don't need to do this on your own. We are stronger together. And the more that we can do this together, the better it will be. Quick side note on editing, because it's popping in my mind in case somebody somewhere at some point listening or watching this needs to know this. When it comes to editing, there are two particular skill sets involved. So you've got line editing and you've got directional editing. That's probably not the proper word for it. The proper word for it escapes me right now, because I didn't know that we were going to being this specific. But line editing is when you go through, as the name implies, line by line by line, checking for typos in essence. And directional editing instead is more about the overall where the book is going. So I gave the example of, that bit doesn't make sense, or I'm not quite sure what's going on here. That's a different skill set to line editing. Now, yes, a good editor can do both, but I mention it because it's really helpful to know when you do get to the point when you're ready to have someone help edit your book, to know what you're asking for. Ideally, you want somebody with a fresh pair of eyes to read your whole book, to tell you where the holes are. Pick this apart, tell me what doesn't make sense, particularly for non-fiction, but this is true for fiction as well. So some of my Charlie Diamond series are like, yeah, you asked all these questions and then you've done this thing and I don't know what, in your brain you know all of the things and you'll jump and fill in the gaps that you don't necessarily always write down. That's where a developmental editor will help you. They will find those gaps for you. Once you've gone through that process and you've done your rewrites and got it sorted, then you hand it over to a line editor who goes through and finds the typos for you. And some people are really magical at finding typos, grammar, all that sort of good stuff. Stray commas and capital letters in the wrong place and all that sort of thing. And also things that are spelling mistakes but don't get picked up by spell check because they're not spelt wrong. It's just like an instead of and, or a finger slip of the finger. So there are two different types of editors: line editors, developmental editors. The word came in my head. There you go. Hey, thank you, Holy Spirit. That's just an aside, really. You don't need to worry about that right now. You are focusing on writing, but I just mention it as something for you to know at a later stage. Speaking of at a later stage, don't forget as well, this series is going to be ending on 31st of October because it's the last day of the month. It's a week on Monday. But the support that you get doesn't need to end there. So if you are wherever you're engaged in that writing process, the Rainbow Room has you covered. It is for planning, writing, publishing and marketing your book. And we've got a vast curriculum. Quite honestly, we're building the curriculum out on a stage-by-stage basis as it is needed, which is actually quite exciting because it means for the people who are there right now, they get to go, yes, I need this thing, which is always fun as well. So if you have been enjoying these episodes and you want the support to continue, I would encourage you to check it out. If you don't do it with me, do it with somebody else. You're going to make better progress on your book and get it actually done with accountability and also with support and, cheerleading, but practical answers as well. So I will mention that again before we finish next week because it's really important to me. I don't want people to go, yeah, that was really exciting. And then they just get a bit going and then they stop. So I make no apology for the fact that I will mention it again. The Rainbow Room is a small group coaching space included inside the Blue House, but it's all included in the monthly membership. You don't have to pay anything extra for it. And there is, of course, as well, if you're really, really busy and you just want the oomph to help get your book finished, we do have finishing school for you as well as a one-on-one option. All of those details, all of that information you can find on the Youier website, youier.com/Rainbow Room. Anyway, that's it for today. Your plaything, much like yesterday, is to get practical with this. It simply means the very next time you put fingers to keyboard or pen to paper, that you do it intentionally with Holy Spirit. Remember that you are writing. Editing is not the same thing. Write when you're writing, edit when you're editing. Don't mix the two up. And turn off your spell checker while you're doing your writing too. You can put it back on afterwards. Thank you for being here. As always, it's my pleasure to share this with you. And with that reminder, if you know somebody who would benefit from this episode or any of the episodes in the series, please do share it with them. On YouTube, we have a playlist for all the videos. We also have a playlist. I think we have a playlist on Facebook. I'll go and check. And the podcast is simply the most recent episodes. So, that's the end of the housekeeping announcements. Thank you for being here. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. It is Friday at the time of recording, so happy Friday. Have a fabulous weekend, and I look forward to catching up with you